My wife thought she had already won. She had no idea the game hadn't even started yet. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of what happened in that lawyer's office in January makes any sense without the full picture. My name is Ross Albright. I'm 47 years old. I've spent the last 18 years running a mid-sized electrical contracting company out of Guelph, Ontario. The kind of business that started with me in a work van at 29 and grew into something with 32 employees, a real office, and contracts with commercial builders across the region. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you that because the business matters to this story in ways that took me a long time to fully understand. My wife, Lena, and I had been together for 11 years, married for 8. We met at a friend's birthday dinner in Kitchener in the winter. She'd just moved back from Vancouver, working as a project coordinator for a property management firm. She was sharp and funny, and she laughed at things I actually found funny, which sounds like a small thing until you've dated enough people where you're faking the laugh. We bought a house in the south end of Guelph near Exhibition Park, when the market was still something a working person could navigate. It needed a new kitchen and a proper basement, and I spent 2 summers doing most of it myself on weekends. Lena picked the countertops. She still calls it her favorite room in the house. Called it. I have to keep catching myself on that. I want to be honest about who I was going into this, because it matters. I'm not a suspicious person. I'm the kind of man who takes people at their word until they give me a reason not to, and sometimes a few reasons after that. My foreman Chet has been ribbing me about it for years. Ross, you'd give a stranger the shirt off your back and then apologize for the color. He's not entirely wrong. The shift started the way these things always seem to start, small enough that you almost talk yourself out of noticing it. It was a Thursday evening in mid-September. We were in the kitchen after dinner, Lena washing dishes, me at the table going over a quote for a warehouse project in Cambridge. Her phone lit up on the counter. She crossed the room, fat and made any sense, picked it up, and turned so her back was to me before she read it. I didn't say anything. People check their phones. That's not a crime. But the next night she took her phone into the bathroom when she had her bath. She'd never done that before. Not once in 8 years of marriage. I told myself I was imagining things. Over the following 2 weeks, I found more things to tell myself I was imagining. She started taking calls in the back garden even when it was cold enough that I could see her breath from the kitchen window. She'd stand out there with one arm wrapped around herself for warmth and talk with her head down like she was reading the grass. When she came back in, her cheeks would be red from the cold, and she'd give me some version of the same few answers. Her sister Jules going through something. A difficult file at work. Nothing to worry about. Fine. Reasonable. Except I'd met her sister Jules a dozen times, and Lena had never once paced the yard at 9 in the evening over Jules's problems before. Then, in early October, she put a passcode on her phone. We'd been together 11 years. Her phone had always been lying around face up on the coffee table, on the nightstand, on the bathroom shelf. She would ask me to read her texts out loud when she was driving. There was nothing covert about us. Or so I thought. When I asked about the passcode, she mentioned something about a memo from her company's IT department. New data privacy protocols for anyone handling tenant records. Plausible. Her company did manage a lot of residential properties. But something about the timing sat wrong with me. The way a floorboard sits wrong when the house is shifted underneath it. I didn't push. I filed it away. The moment that actually moved something in my chest happened on a Wednesday afternoon in the middle of October. I came home from a site visit early. A foundation inspection had wrapped faster than expected, and I pulled into the driveway to find Lena's car there, which surprised me because she usually didn't finish until 5. I let myself in through the side door, and she was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a legal-sized notepad covered in her handwriting. The second I stepped inside, she shut the laptop and flipped the notepad face down in one motion, smooth and practiced like she'd rehearsed it. "Didn't expect you yet," she said. Clearly. I set my bag down. "Everything okay? Just catching up on some admin." She was already stacking the notepad under the laptop, squaring the corners, boring stuff. I caught 2 words on the top edge of the notepad before she covered it. Asset and division. I said nothing. I went to get a glass of water. I stood at the sink, looking out at the backyard where she'd been making those cold evening phone calls, and I tried very hard to think about something other than those 2 words. That night I barely slept. I lay in the dark listening to Lena breathe and running the list in my head. The phone, the passcode, the garden calls, asset division. Each one of those things on its own was nothing. A coincidence, a bad week. Married people are allowed to have things they don't share with each other, I know that. But stacked together, at 1 in the morning in the dark, they had a shape I didn't like. The following Saturday, I told Lena I was taking the truck in for an oil change and an inspection, which was true. What I didn't mention was that I was also calling my old university friend Stuart Mackay on the way there. Stuart had gone into family law after school and had a practice now in Hamilton. We hadn't talked in nearly a year. He picked up on the third ring. I told him everything. The phone, the calls, the notepad, those 2 words. I probably talked for 15 minutes straight without stopping. He was quiet for a moment when I finished. Ross. He chose his words carefully. I'm not going to tell you your marriage is definitely in trouble, but I will tell you this. If even part of what you're describing is pointing where it looks like it's pointing, you need to get ahead of it, legally, quietly. Now, we talked for another half hour. Stuart walked me through what I needed to understand. The business I'd built before Lena and I met was a pre-marital asset, but the growth it had generated during our marriage could be considered a matrimonial asset under Ontario family law. The house was joint. Our RRSPs were straightforward, but there were gray areas, particularly around the company valuation, that someone with the right lawyer and the right strategy could push hard on. Document everything, Stuart said. Your premarital contributions, your separate property, any inheritance, anything with a clear paper trail that predates the marriage. Get it organized now. Not because you're hiding anything, because you're not, but because if someone is building a case, you want your side of the ledger to be bulletproof before she files a single page. I spent the next 10 days doing exactly that. I pulled together my incorporation records from 2006, 3 years before Lena and I even met. I documented the initial capital investment, the early contracts, the loan I'd taken out in my own name that I'd spent 4 years paying off. I notarized everything with dates. My accountant, a meticulous man named Walter Ossie, who I've trusted for 12 years, helped me run a clean separation between what was provably mine from before the marriage and what had grown jointly during it. Every transfer properly documented, every signature witnessed, nothing rushed, nothing hidden. Stuart told me that was enough. He was wrong. Not about the documentation, about it being enough. Because by then I'd started noticing something else. Lena had always been interested in the business. She'd ask about contracts over dinner. She'd pass along advice when she had it. She'd occasionally vent about the administrative chaos of managing a growing company. But starting in mid-October, her interest shifted from conversational to specific. She started asking about individual contracts. What was the Cambridge warehouse job worth? Had I renewed the supply agreement with the wholesaler in Brampton? What were the company's outstanding liabilities right now, roughly? I answered her. I didn't have any reason not to. We were married. She'd always been in the loop to some degree. But I started noticing that after those conversations her phone would come out almost immediately. She'd carry it into the other room. The backyard calls started again even as November came in cold. 3 weeks in, on a Tuesday morning after she left for work, I sat down with our joint bank account and went through 5 months of statements line by line. I want to tell you I found something dramatic. I didn't. What I found was careful. 4 withdrawals over the previous 6 weeks. 300 here, 450 there, 220. Each one just under the threshold that would trigger our bank's automatic alert. Each one transferred to an account I didn't recognize under a generic savings label I'd never set up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. I called Stuart that afternoon. He wasn't surprised. He told me to keep documenting and stay quiet. Don't confront her yet. Don't signal that you know. Let the situation develop and make sure your position is solid before anything moves. It was good advice. I followed it for another week. And then I did something Stuart didn't know about. Something I haven't told most people, because when I say it out loud it sounds colder than I actually felt doing it. I felt sick doing it, honestly. I sat with it for 3 days before I went through with it. Here's what I knew about Lena after 11 years. She was smart about money in theory but impatient with complexity in practice. She'd always wanted me to simplify the business financials. Fewer holding structures, fewer accounts, everything visible in one place. What this meant practically was that she trusted a clean number more than she trusted a complicated one. Show her a spreadsheet with a lot of columns and her eyes would glaze over. Show her a single summary figure with a $sign in front of it, and she'd anchor to that number immediately. I used to think this was just a personality difference between us. In November, I realized it was something I could work with. I have a second incorporated entity, a numbered company I set up years ago as a holding structure for some commercial property. It doesn't carry the Albright electrical name, just a provincial registration number and a corporate designation. Most people outside my accountant and my lawyer don't know it exists, including, as far as I knew, Lena. I printed a single page, a legitimate document, a projected valuation summary that Walter had actually prepared months earlier as part of an internal review, showing what the holding company's assets might be worth at current market rates under ideal conditions over a 10-year horizon. It was clearly marked at the top as a forward projection and clearly marked at the bottom. In the standard disclaimer language every financial document of this type carries, as an estimate, not a current balance. Out of context, to someone who didn't read the fine print carefully, it looked like a current asset statement. The number on it was substantial, more than Lena would have expected. I left it in the filing drawer in my home office, which I keep locked, but which Lena has always had the key to. I put it under an old folder of insurance correspondence. I left it in exactly the kind of spot someone goes looking through when they're looking for something else and can't help themselves from going a little further. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. 4 days later I came home to find the filing drawer slightly open. I always push it until it clicks. It hadn't clicked. The insurance folder was back where it belonged, but the pages weren't squared the way I leave them. The projection summary was still there, but at a different angle than I'd placed it. Someone had been through that drawer. Over the days that followed, Lena changed. It was subtle. The tension she'd been carrying for weeks, that tight, watchful energy I'd been living alongside without naming, began to ease. The garden calls stopped. She seemed lighter, almost expansive. She suggested we have people over for dinner, something we hadn't done in months. She stood in front of the fireplace one evening and talked about eventually doing the back deck properly, as if she were picturing something. I watched her and said all the right things and felt something go very still and quiet inside me. She thought she'd found the number. She had no idea she'd found exactly the number I needed her to find. The organized conversation started the following week. Did I know where the corporate filing records were kept? Did I have a current list of the company accounts? I should really get everything into one place, she said. Just in case. Just in case of what, Lena? I didn't say that out loud. I said, yeah, you're right, we should probably do that, and I went back to what I was doing. By the last week of November, the organized conversations stopped. She didn't bring them up anymore. She already thought she knew what she needed to know. Then she got quiet in a different way. Purposeful. Like someone who has made a decision and is simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. That moment came on a Friday evening in the first week of December. I'd been at a site walk in Cambridge and got home just before 6. Lena was sitting at the kitchen table with a large envelope in front of her and her hands folded on top of it. She had an expression I hadn't seen on her before, composed and slightly distant, the way a person looks when they've rehearsed being calm. There's something we need to talk about, she said. The envelope had my name on it. I already knew what was inside before I touched it. The divorce application had been filed at the Superior Court of Justice in Guelph 2 days earlier. I read through the financial disclosures section. Her expectations, laid out in her lawyer's language, were not small. An equitable division of what she described as the total marital estate, including what she listed as a current corporate asset, valued at a figure that matched almost exactly what had been on that projection page in my filing drawer. A figure that had never, in any actual account, ever existed as a present balance. She'd built her entire opening position around a number I'd manufactured to test her. I set the papers down on the table. I kept my voice as level as I could make it. Okay, I said. We'll need to involve lawyers. I'll call mine. She looked at me like she'd expected more of a reaction. I'm not trying to make this ugly, Ross. I just need to protect myself. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say anything after that. I called Stuart that night. He already had everything prepared. The pre-marital documentation, the properly dated transfers, the notarized asset records, all of it locked and time-stamped well before she'd filed a single page. When I told him about the projection sheet, about what she'd listed in her financial disclosure, he went quiet for a long moment. Tell me that again, he said. I told him again. Ross. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. I've been doing family law for 14 years. I need you to walk me through exactly how that document got into her disclosure. I walked him through it, every detail. Another long pause. Okay, he said finally. Mediation is going to be something. He had no idea. The mediation was scheduled for a Friday in mid-January at the offices of Lena's lawyer, a man named Robert Chadwick, who operated out of a glass and brick building on Wyndham Street in downtown Guelph. The kind of office with leather chairs and framed art and water in a glass pitcher that nobody ever pours from. Stuart and I arrived early. Lena was already there when we came in, sitting across the long conference table with Chadwick beside her, a yellow legal pad in front of him, his pen already moving. Chadwick opened the way those lawyers always open, with a confident summary of his client's position, and a folder slid across the table in our direction. "Our client is requesting an equitable division of the matrimonial estate," he said, "including the matrimonial home, registered savings accrued during the marriage, and what we understand to be a substantial corporate asset currently held under a numbered company. Valued at," he cited the number from the projection sheet, "which our client believes represents a significant portion of the undisclosed marital wealth." Stuart didn't reach for the folder. He folded his hands on the table and looked at Chadwick the way a man looks when he's about to explain something to someone who isn't going to enjoy the explanation. "I'd like to address the corporate asset reference directly," Stuart said, "because I think there's been a meaningful misunderstanding, and I'd rather clarify it now than let it complicate what should be a straightforward process." Lena's eyes were steady. She still thought she was sitting on solid ground. Stuart laid it out without drama. The numbered holding company was real. Here were the incorporation documents, the registration predating the marriage by 6 years. The company held real property assets. Here was the current, audited valuation, prepared by a certified accountant, reflecting actual present-day market conditions. That number was notably different from the number in Lena's disclosure. Stuart then placed the projection summary on the table, the same page that had been in my filing drawer. "This document," Stuart said, "is a forward projection prepared as part of an internal financial review. It is clearly labeled as such at the top of the page and carries the standard forward-looking disclaimer at the bottom. It reflects a hypothetical 10-year growth scenario under ideal conditions. It has never represented a current balance. My client made no representation to anyone that it did. He never discussed this document with his wife. He never told her it was a balance statement. If someone accessed his private files without his knowledge and drew an incorrect conclusion from a clearly labeled projection document, that is an error in interpretation. It is not a misrepresentation of a marital asset." The room was very quiet. I watched it register on Lena's face in stages. First a small confusion, like she hadn't quite heard. Then a tightening around her eyes as she looked at the page Stuart had placed on the table. Then something that went out of her face entirely, like a light switching off behind her expression. "That's not," she started. "It's a projection," Stuart said quietly. He slid the document toward her so she could read the fine print, clearly labeled, top and bottom. Chadwick reached over and pulled the page. I watched him scan it. His jaw shifted. He'd built his client's opening position, her financial confidence, her entire disclosure, around a number that had never existed as a present balance. He turned to speak to Lena quietly and she shook her head, a tight, small motion. She looked at me then. "Pass Stuart, pass the papers directly at me." "You left that there for me to find," she said. Her voice was low. I didn't look away. "I left it there to see what you'd do with it," I said. "I think we both learned something." Chadwick asked for a recess. 20 minutes. When they came back, the energy in the room had completely shifted. The corporate asset figure disappeared from the discussion. The inflated valuation was gone. What remained was what had always been there. The actual matrimonial assets, the actual account balances, the actual present-day numbers. Stuart's documentation was thorough and ironclad, every pre-marital asset clearly separated. Every transfer dated and notarized weeks before her filing. Under Ontario's equalization of net family property rules, the settlement came out close to what the law would have required regardless. No bonus. No windfall built on a number she'd found in a drawer and never thought to verify. Lena did not take it well. The calls started that evening. Not angry at first. The first few were confused, almost searching. "Can we talk? I need to understand what happened. Did you know the whole time?" By the second night, the tone had shifted, swinging between something that sounded like genuine hurt and something that sounded a lot like fury. Sometimes within the same message. She called me calculating. She said what I'd done was a form of cruelty. She said she felt ambushed. I want to sit with that word, ambushed, because I did. I thought about it for a while. I didn't respond to any of it. Stuart had advised against it, and for once the right advice was also the easiest advice to follow. What I didn't know yet was that there was more to the picture than I could see from where I was standing. About 3 weeks after the mediation, in early February, I got a call from someone I knew slightly from a recreational hockey league I'd played in a few years earlier. His name was Philip Hartley, 44, a commercial insurance broker from Cambridge. We'd grabbed a beer once or twice after games, the kind of easy acquaintance that doesn't require much maintenance. He asked if he could meet me for coffee, said he had something to tell me, and wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing by telling me, but had decided I deserved to know. We met at a place near the river on a Tuesday morning. He slid his phone across the table the way people do when they want you to see something before they have to explain it. It was a series of text messages between Lena and a man named Jordan. I didn't get the last name at the time, who turned out to work in residential real estate in the Kitchener-Waterloo area and had a mutual connection through Philip's circle who'd gotten uneasy watching events unfold. The messages went back 4.5 months, since August. Before the passcode, before the garden calls, before the notepad on the kitchen table with those 2 words on it. They'd been planning together for the entire stretch. I'd spent slowly piecing things together on my own. I read through them slowly. There were messages about timelines, about settlement expectations, about what Lena was going to do when she had access to what she described as the full picture of Ross's holdings. Jordan's replies were practical and eager, in a way that told me he wasn't in this as a bystander. There was a message from the week before mediation. Once the equalization comes through, we can move fast. I've already been looking at properties. His response: don't let him negotiate you down. You've done the hard part, we move the second it clears. And then there were the messages from the night of the mediation. Lena, the number wasn't real. I don't understand what happened. He somehow knew. Jordan, what do you mean it wasn't real? Lena, the valuation was a projection, not a balance. His lawyer said he never told me it was a balance. I don't know what to do. A pause of about 40 minutes. Jordan, so what's the actual number? She told him. Another pause. Shorter this time. Jordan, after that, he went quiet. There were 3 more messages from Lena over the following 2 days. He didn't answer any of them. I gave Philip his phone back. I thanked him, and I meant it more than I could properly say in a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. Those messages didn't stay private for long. Philip hadn't told anyone except a mutual friend who'd first flagged the situation to him, and that friend had less restraint than Philip. Over the following weeks, the broad shape of what Lena had been planning, and who she'd been planning it with, made its way through the networks of people we'd both known for years. The story she'd been telling some of those people, that I'd been hiding money, that I'd blindsided her, that I'd behaved dishonestly, collapsed quickly once the actual timeline became clear. Her brother Kevin called me in late February. He'd sent me a cold message right after the filing, something brief and pointed about being unsurprised by my behavior. He called now to take it back. I only had her version, he said. I'm sorry I didn't ask for yours. The divorce was finalized in March, just under 6 months after I'd first noticed Lena cross a room faster than she needed to in order to pick up her phone on a September evening. I kept the house. I kept the business. My business. The one I'd spent 18 years building from a single van and a lot of early mornings. I kept what was mine, properly documented, legally protected, exactly as it had always been. Lena received what Ontario law entitled her to, an equalization of the genuinely shared assets, fairly calculated, nothing more. I won't pretend that's a clean ending. You don't spend 11 years with a person, build a home with them, choose them over and over across 8 years of marriage, and then feel nothing when it ends. I still think about who she was when I met her, the woman who laughed at the right things, and picked out the kitchen countertops, and stood next to me when my father was sick, and didn't make a production of being there. I don't know when that version of her changed, or whether she changed, or whether I simply didn't know her as well as I thought I did. Both possibilities are hard in different ways. My mother drove up from Burlington in April with a car full of plants she insisted the house needed and an opinion about every room that I hadn't asked for and was glad to get. She made me move the desk out of the home office, where the filing drawer still sat in the corner. Said it was keeping bad energy in the room, which is not a phrase I expected to hear from a 71-year-old retired nurse from Burlington, Ontario, but she wasn't wrong. People ask me sometimes whether I regret the projection sheet, whether leaving that document in that drawer crosses a line I should be uncomfortable crossing. I've thought about that question more than I'd like to admit. Here's what I've landed on. I never told Lena that document was a balance. I never showed it to her. I never brought it up in conversation. I left a clearly labeled piece of paper in my own filing drawer, and she chose, of her own free will, to go through my private files, find it, misread it, and build an entire legal strategy and apparently an entire planned future with someone else, around a number she never thought to verify and I never confirmed. She wasn't caught in a trap. She was undone by her own certainty. The certainty that she already knew what I had, that she already understood the full picture, that the only thing left to do was act. She never stopped to ask whether the number she'd found was what she thought it was. She never asked me. She never asked her accountant to verify it. She just assumed because she wanted the number to be real, and so it was real to her. That kind of certainty is its own undoing. I didn't create it. I just gave it somewhere to go. The house is quiet now in the way a house is supposed to be quiet, settled, not held. The plants my mother brought are doing better than I expected. The kitchen still has the countertops Lena picked out, and I'm not in any rush to change them, because they're good countertops, and she had decent taste, and some things can just be what they are without being a story. I'm not in a hurry for much of anything right now. That's new for me. I've spent 18 years moving fast. New contracts, new crews, new problems to solve before the next ones arrived. For the first time in a long time, I have a house that's peaceful because it is peaceful, not because I'm too tired to notice the silence underneath it. That's a kind of starting over too. It just didn't look anything like what either of us had been planning. If this story meant something to you, hit like and subscribe. There are more of these coming, and you're going to want to be here for them.